two orphan boys dragged the Snakebit rancher to their mother's one-room shack. The snake was under the rock before I saw it. That's the thing about rattlers, they don't announce themselves until they already have you. I'd been moving a fence post out by the creek bend, the eastern edge of my land where the water cuts close and the ground goes soft in late spring. I'd reached down without looking. The rock had been there for years. I knew that rock. I'd used it to anchor fence line twice before, but something had moved under it or something had come to it, and when my hand went down to roll it aside, I felt the hit before I heard the rattle. 2 strikes fast. Back of the right forearm, just below the elbow where the skin is thin. I stood up straight and looked at my arm. The marks were already raising. 2 little red points, close together, and the skin around them going tight and pale in a circle the size of a silver dollar. I'd been snakebit once as a boy on the ankle. My father had cut it and sucked it, and I'd been sick 3 days, but I'd lived. That was a single strike, and I'd been young and the bite hadn't gone deep. This was 2 strikes, high on the arm, close to the blood. And I was 41 years old, alone on a stretch of land 11 miles from the nearest settlement, with no horse close and my rifle back at the cabin. I started walking. The cabin was 1.5 miles northeast, up a long shallow grade through grass that ran to my hip. I made it maybe a 1/4 mile before my arm started to swell. I could feel the tightness climbing past the elbow into the bicep. My hand felt like it belonged to someone else, fingers thick and slow to close. I stopped and unbuckled my belt and worked it loose and cinched it around my upper arm, tight as I could stand. That's what my father had done. Slow it down, keep it from the heart. I kept walking. The sun was wrong for the time of day. Or maybe I was wrong. I'd left the cabin at mid-morning to fix the fence. It should have been close to noon. But the light seemed to be tilting, shifting angles it had no business shifting. Sweat came through my shirt cold. That wasn't right either. It was a warm day, a real warm day, the kind of May afternoon that promises summer is already here whether you want it or not. But I was cold through, shaking in my arms and jaw, and the grass ahead of me kept going longer than it ought to. I fell once, got up, fell again and lay there a moment looking at the sky and trying to remember why I had to get up. The reason came back to me slow, the cabin, the kit, the knife. Cut it open, get the poison out. That's what I had to do. I'd gotten up for dumber reasons. I made it up and got moving again, but the grade felt steeper than it had any right to be. I was going in and out of something, not sleep, not exactly. A thick place. I'd walk a stretch and then I'd be somewhere else for a moment, and then I'd be back in the grass, still walking, boots still moving under me, but not always sure how much time had gone by between one step and the next. I went down a 3rd time about 40 yards from a creek I didn't recognize. That creek shouldn't have been there. I knew my land. I'd walked every inch of it over the 8 years I'd been on it. There was no creek 40 yards north of the fence post rock. There was only the grade, the open grass, and then the cabin. I tried to work out where I was. I must have turned. At some point when the thick place took me, I must have turned, walked a wrong line, come out somewhere other than where I meant to be. The creek was running clear and cold. I pulled myself to the bank and put my face in it. That brought me back some. I lay there on my belly with the water running over my lips and my forehead, and I waited until the shaking slowed and the sky stopped tilting. Then I looked up. The boys were standing on the other bank. 2 of them. The taller one maybe 9 or 10, the smaller one closer to 6. Both in patched shirts too short in the sleeves, barefoot in the mud at the creek's edge, staring at me with the particular blankness children get when they see something they don't know how to place, not afraid yet, not sure yet whether to run. I said something, I don't know what. My voice came out thick and wrong. I think I said I needed help. I think I said I was snakebit. The taller boy looked at the smaller one. Some wordless thing passed between them, the kind of look brothers make when they've had to handle things too large for them before and learned how to make quick decisions together. Then the taller boy stepped into the creek, which came to his knee, and crossed to my side and crouched down and looked at my arm. "That's pretty bad," he said, not scared, just honest. "Yeah," I said. "Can you walk?" "Some." He stood up and took my left arm, the good one, and pulled it over his shoulders. He was a thin kid, but there was nothing soft about the way he held me up. He leaned into it, legs braced, took my weight without comment. The smaller boy had crossed the creek by then too, and he got up under my other side on the swollen arm and was careful not to touch it. That struck me even then, even in the state I was in, that the small one had noticed which arm and had been careful of it without being told. They walked me. I don't know how far, half a mile, maybe more. I went back into the thick place twice, and both times came out of it still walking, still held up on both sides. At some point the smaller boy was singing to himself very quietly. Some tune I didn't know, just sounds really, a made-up melody. I don't think he knew he was doing it. The shack came into view through a stand of cottonwoods. One room, rough lumber gone gray, a stovepipe out the roof, a kitchen garden along the south wall. Small place. The kind of place a person builds when they don't have much, and they build it themselves because they have to, and they do it careful because it's all they've got. The taller boy called ahead, "Mama." She came out of the door before we reached it. I registered her in pieces, the way you do when your brain isn't working full. Dark hair loose from a braid, flour on her apron, a dish towel in one hand. She stopped when she saw us, saw me, and then she moved, not panicked, not the way women in stories move when something frightens them. She moved the way a person moves when they've seen bad things before and they know bad things have a shape and they know what to do about them. "Get him inside," she said. "Amos, clear the cot." The taller boy, Amos, let go of me and went ahead. She came in on my left side and took what he'd been holding without breaking stride, and the smaller boy and I and her came through the door together, and they put me on the cot along the far wall, and she looked at my arm for about 2 seconds, and then she turned and went to the stove. "What got you?" she said. "Rattle or 2 strikes. Forearm." "How long ago?" "I don't know, maybe 2 hours. She came back with a knife she'd had heating in the fire and a rag and a tin cup, and she looked at me once before she did anything else. Not asking permission exactly. More like she was telling me what was about to happen and checking that I understood. "This is going to hurt," she said. "All right." She cut it. 3 passes, quick and sure, crossing the marks. She squeezed and blotted, and I went somewhere else entirely for a while, and when I came back she was working by lamplight, which meant time had passed, which meant I'd been out. The smaller boy was sitting in the corner with his knees drawn up, watching me with large, serious eyes. Amos was at the table eating something from a bowl. "You went cold on me," she said, not looking up. "That's normal with the venom, don't worry about it." "I'm not worried," I said. That made her glance up, a quick look, assessing. Then she went back to what she was doing. She was kneeling beside the cot, working by lamplight, and her hands were steady and sure. She had a bowl of water and a cloth, and she'd been at it a while. I could see the water line in the bowl, most of it gone, the cloth already used and wrung out and used again. My forearm was wrapped now in cloth strips, tight and even. She hadn't done a rough job. She'd done it like she'd done it before, like she knew how. I watched her work. I was too tired and too sick to be anything but what I was right then. A man flat on a cot who owed his life to a woman he'd never met, and 2 small boys who'd carried him out of the grass. The smaller boy in the corner hadn't moved. I caught his eyes once. He didn't look away. He just watched me with that same large, serious calm, and after a moment he picked up a piece of pine wood from the stack near the stove and turned it over in his hands without purpose, just to have something to do, and kept watching. I closed my eyes. The first night was the worst of it. The fever came up hard around midnight, and I knew it when it came because the cold went away and was replaced by something that felt like being too close to a fire from the inside. I heard her voice and couldn't always make out the words. I heard the stove door open and close, heard something being poured. She made me drink twice. The second time I resisted without meaning to, and she said, quietly and firmly, the way you talk to an animal that needs convincing, "Drink it, all of it." I drank it. At some point in the deep of the night, I thought I heard the smaller boy crying, very softly, and then I heard her voice and the crying stopped, and there was the creak of the cot ropes in the other part of the room where she'd put the boys to sleep. I lay still and listened to the fire, and the breathing of people sleeping and the sound, far off, of the creek. I thought, lying there, about my mother. I hadn't thought about her in years. She died when I was 12, just gone one winter the way people went then, a cold that went to the lungs and didn't leave. My father had managed 3 more years on his own, and then he'd gone too, and I'd been 15 and on my own, and that had become the shape of my life so quickly and so completely that I'd stopped thinking of it as something that had happened to me. It was just what I was. 15, then 20, then 30, alone, moving, and that was the whole story. But lying in that shack in the dark with the fever working on me, I thought about my mother, the weight of her hand on my forehead when I was sick as a small boy. The sound of her in a room before you came into it, the particular sounds of her going about her work, the scrape of a pot, a low hum she didn't know she made. How when she came into a room you were in, something in the room changed. How when she left it, something left with her. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. I hadn't let myself. Clara came back to the cot with a cool cloth and put it against my forehead without a word. And I was too sick and too old and too honest with myself in that hour to pretend that the feeling wasn't what it was. She stayed up. She didn't sleep that night. I knew it because every time I surfaced from the thick place she was there, sitting beside the cot with her mending or just sitting, in the firelight, steady. Once when I came up fast from a bad dream and my hand grabbed at the edge of the cot, she put her hand over mine without comment, just a pressure, just, "I'm here, settle down." My heart settled. I went back under. In the morning, she looked tired the way you look when you haven't slept, but you're not going to say anything about it. At some point between the first night and the third morning, I was lucid enough to think clearly about what she was doing. She was a woman alone with 2 boys, a stranger on her cot, 3 days of nursing she hadn't asked for and hadn't been paid for and couldn't afford in time or sleep. There was nothing in it for her. There was no reason, no practical reason, to stay up through the night for a man she didn't know. She did it because when something needed doing, she did it. That was just her constitution. I thought about that for a long time in the lucid hours. I thought about what it meant to be built that way. The fever broke on the third morning. I knew it the way you know a storm has passed. The world went quiet, I went still, and I woke up feeling scraped out and thin but clear. The shack was filling with early light. Clara was at the stove. She heard me move and turned. "Hungry?" she said. "Yes." "That's a good sign." She made me porridge and sat with me while I ate it. The boys were still asleep. I could hear the smaller one breathing from behind the curtain that divided the room. Clara drank coffee and looked out the small window, and for a while neither of us said anything. Her name was Clara Marsh. She told me that while I ate her name, the boys' names, the shape of things. Amos was 10, would be 11 in August. Eli was 6. Her husband Robert had been dead 2 years, a caving accident in a mine 30 miles north. She'd stayed on the land because she had nowhere else to go and because the land was hers, paid for, the one thing she owned outright. She worked a kitchen garden, kept 2 goats, took in mending from the settlement when she could get it. Amos helped her with everything. Eli helped in his own way, which was mostly to watch things carefully and report what he observed, and occasionally to take apart whatever small mechanical thing was within his reach to see how it worked. She said all of this plainly and without self-pity. She wasn't after sympathy and she wasn't after anything. She was just telling me what was, the way she'd looked at my arm the first night and told me what that was too. "You've been managing 2 years on your own out here," I said. 3, counting the last year with Robert at the mine. He was gone more than he was home. I looked at my porridge. That's a long time. She shrugged one shoulder, a small movement dismissive of its own difficulty. You find out what you're made of. You'd rather not find out that way, but there it is. Then she said, "You've been alone a long time, too. You live on the Ferris land east of the creek bend. Alone. 8 years. That's a long time to work a ranch by yourself." "It gets done," I said. And then, because she'd been honest with me, "Gets done, and that's about all you can say for it." She looked at her coffee cup a moment. "What's your name?" I'd been flat on her cot for 3 days and she didn't know my name. I hadn't told her and she hadn't asked, not in the middle of everything. That struck me as something, as the right way of doing things, the practical order: save the man first and learn his name after. "Caleb Thorne," I said. She nodded once like she was filing it. "All right, Caleb." I stayed 3 more days. It wasn't by design, the staying. The second day, I tried to get up and got dizzy enough that I sat back down fast, and the room tilted for a good 5 minutes. And Clara came in from the garden and looked at me, and said I wasn't walking anywhere yet, and I didn't argue because I wasn't in any position to. The boys were careful with me in a way I found hard to name. Not shy, exactly. Amos had questions about my land, about the cattle, about the fence post I'd been trying to move when the snake found me. He asked them like a man would, direct, one at a time, waiting for the answer before the next one. He was maybe 10 years old and he had the conversational habits of someone twice that. He'd already figured out angles and distances I hadn't told him. He'd mapped the land in his head from what I said, put things together, understood the farm as a working system. I liked him immediately and completely, and tried not to show it too obviously because I didn't want to embarrass him. Eli was different. He didn't ask questions. He watched. He'd settle near me while I was on the cot or when I was sitting outside in the afternoon, which Clara let me do on the second day, in a chair against the south wall where the sun hit, and he'd just be there. Close. Not touching, not talking. Just present the way a good dog is present. At some point on the second afternoon, he brought me a piece of flat rock he'd found at the creek, smooth and gray-blue, and put it in my lap, and then went back to whatever he'd been doing. I turned it over in my left hand for a long time. He was a boy who'd lost his father at 3 years old. I didn't make anything out of it, didn't try to be something I wasn't, but I thought about it. I held the rock and thought about what it means when a little boy who doesn't remember his father sees a strange man on his mother's cot and brings him a pretty rock from the creek. Clara and I talked in the evenings after the boys were in bed. Not about anything important at first. The garden, the goats, the strange wet spring that had lasted too long, the settlement and its small dramas. She'd grown up in Kansas, she said, on a wheat farm. She'd come west with her husband when he'd gone chasing silver, the way men did in those years, and she'd followed because that's what she'd done, what she'd chosen. And when the silver didn't pan out and Robert found work at the mine, she'd made a life where they were. Then Robert was gone and the mine was gone and she was here still, because the land was hers. "Do you regret it?" I asked her once, the following west part. She thought about it. She didn't give fast answers, I'd noticed that. She let questions sit a moment, turned them, made sure she was saying what she meant. "No," she said finally. "He was a good man, he was trying. The mine caved and that wasn't his fault and it wasn't my fault, and I'm not going to spend my life regretting that I loved someone who died." She paused. "The boys are here because we came here, so I can't regret that." I looked at the fire. She said, "You've been alone a long time." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer it like one. 8 years more or less, I said. Was alone before that too, but not the same kind. "What's the difference?" I thought about it. Before I was alone and moving, figured I'd stop somewhere eventually. The alone felt temporary. I turned my coffee cup in my hands. 8 years on the same ground, it starts to feel like just what you are. She was quiet for a bit. "Is that all right with you?" she said. "Is it what you want?" I looked up at her. She was watching me with those direct brown eyes, not pushing, just asking. Like she wanted to know the true answer and was willing to wait for it. I don't think I asked myself that question in a while, I said. Maybe you should. I left on the 5th day, mid-morning, with my arm wrapped, and a jar of the bitter medicine in my coat pocket, and Eli's gray-blue rock, which I'd put in my other pocket without really deciding to. Amos walked me out to the cottonwoods and pointed me northeast, and told me the bearing that would bring me back to familiar ground. You know this land pretty well, I said. Mostly, he said. He had a way of standing with his hands at his sides, easy but alert, that I recognized from men who'd been keeping watch over things since they were young. I walk it some. You ever come up near the fence line by the creek bend, the east side where the rock is? Sometimes. Next time you do, come on up to the cabin. I'll have the kettle on. He looked at me steady. All right, he said, simple as that. I walked out through the cottonwoods. I didn't go back that week, or the next. I had work, the fence still needed finishing, there were cattle to move, 2 weeks of tasks backed up in those 5 days I'd been gone. I threw myself at it, the way I always threw myself at work, the way I'd always known how to do, and the days went by and the arm healed and I was myself again in body if not entirely in whatever else a man is. But things had shifted, not in a way I could name right away. More like when you've been looking at a piece of land so long you stop seeing it, and then a rain comes and changes the light and you look up and see it all fresh. The cabin felt different when I came in from work in the evenings. Not worse, just particular. I noticed the one chair, the one cup, the way my boots were the only boots and my coat was the only coat on the peg by the door. I noticed the flat gray-blue rock on the windowsill where I'd put it. I thought about the 5 days on the cot in a different way than I thought about the snake or the fever. Those I'd think about and feel the cold of them, the sick of them, the nearness of going wrong in the grass alone and nobody finding me until the grass was tall. But the 5 days themselves, the boys at the table, Clara's voice in the dark, the smell of that shack in the morning, wood smoke and porridge and the particular cold that comes through old boards in May, those I thought about differently. I turned them over the way Eli had turned that piece of wood in his hands, not trying to get to anything, just holding them. 3 weeks after I'd walked out of the cottonwoods, on a Saturday afternoon in June, I rode to the settlement for supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, a new file for the axe. I loaded the saddlebags and was tying them off outside the general store when Amos appeared at my elbow. He'd come in with his mother for the mending. She was inside the store, he said, picking it up. He'd been waiting outside. He said it matter-of-factly, as if waiting for things outside stores was a normal Saturday occupation, which for a boy in a settlement with not much else on offer I supposed it was. We stood together in the sun while I finished with the bags. He asked how the arm was. I told him it was good, mostly. He nodded. He told me they'd found another rattler under the woodpile 2 weeks back, had killed it with a hoe. He said his mother had done the killing because he hadn't gotten there fast enough and she'd already handled it. He said this without embarrassment, just reporting what happened, giving credit where it was due. Your mother, I said, how is she doing, the two of you? Fine, he said. He thought about it more. She works hard, she doesn't complain. No, I said. I didn't think she did. Clara came out with a paper-wrapped bundle and stopped when she saw me. There was a beat, a short one, a half-second where she just looked at me, and I looked at her, and the 6 weeks since I'd walked out of the cottonwoods were in that beat, and whatever she made of 6 weeks of me not coming back, she made it and put it away and came forward and said, "Good to see you up and around." I meant to come sooner, I said. You had work to do. I did, I looked at her. That's not the whole of it. She held the bundle against her chest and waited. She was good at waiting. I wasn't sure if coming back was something you wanted, I said, or if it would be a complication. She held my eyes for a moment. Then she looked down at the bundle in her arms and a small thing happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, something more private than that. "It wouldn't be a complication," she said. Amos was looking at his feet with the elaborate disinterest of a 10-year-old, who is paying absolute attention. I said, "I'd like to bring some supplies out when I come. There are things I've got more of than I need." "We're not charity cases," she said, but she said it evenly without heat. "I know that. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering to bring things when I come the way you bring something when you visit someone." I paused. "Which is what I mean to do, visit." She looked at me again. That same steady look, the one that didn't let you off easy and didn't make you feel bad about it. "All right," she said. I went the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. In the beginning it was afternoons. I'd ride out after morning chores, stay for a few hours, ride back before dark. Clara would have coffee and sometimes bread, and I'd sit at the table with her and the boys and we'd talk about the week, the land, the settlement news, whatever one of the boys had found or figured out or broken. Eli, I discovered, was a disassembler. He'd take apart anything that could be taken apart to see how it worked, and he was often holding the pieces of something that had been whole when his mother last saw it. She was patient about this in the way of a woman who has made peace with a particular quality in her child, because fighting it has clearly never done any good. One Sunday in July, I spent the morning patching the south wall of the shack where a board had gone soft and was admitting wind. Clara didn't ask me to. I'd seen it the Sunday before, and I'd thought about it all week, and I brought the boards and the hammer and did it. She watched me for a minute when I started, that measuring look, and then she went back inside and didn't say anything about it until I was done, and she handed me a cup of water. "Thank you," she said. "Board needed replacing." I know it did still. She looked at the wall. I'd been putting it off. "There's always something else first." "There is with a place," I said. "You can't get ahead of it, you just try to stay even." "Is that what you do?" "Mostly I fall behind and then I work hard for a stretch and catch up and then fall behind again." I drank the water. "That's ranching, I think." She looked at me sideways. "Is it worth it?" I thought about it honestly. It's what I know how to do. There's a satisfaction to it I can't find in other things. Whether that's worth it. I looked out at the land around the shack, the cottonwoods, the creek through them catching the afternoon light. I never had a reason to weigh it against anything else. She held my eyes when I said that. I held hers. We were getting at something. We both knew it. Neither of us was the type to rush at a thing. August came in hot and dry. I was out at the fence line more than usual, chasing breaks, losing cattle through into the next quarter section and having to go get them. I was tired in the evenings, and sometimes I didn't ride out on Sundays, and each time I didn't I was aware of it in a way I hadn't been aware of missing anything in a long time. Not an ache exactly. More like a compass that's been corrected, and now shows you that you've been walking wrong for years. And every time you turn from the true heading you feel the pull of it. I was out one evening near the eastern fence, the same fence I'd been working when the snake found me, tightening wire in the last light. I had the pliers and the wire stretcher and I was working alone the way I always worked, the way I'd always been fine with, and I realized I was thinking about supper at the shack. Not about food. About the table, the lamplight, the way Amos ate with the deliberate efficiency of a boy who has thought about efficiency, and Eli who ate slowly because he was always distracted by something he was working out in his head. Clara across from me with her coffee, the sound of them. I set down the pliers and looked at the fence and then at the land running west, going gold in the last light. 11 miles of it to the settlement, and the settlement another 30 from anywhere. There are some things a man knows before he lets himself know them. I started bringing things. Not as charity, I'd said, and I meant it. But I had flour in quantity and she was making do on short bags, and I had a side of salt pork I'd put up that spring that was more than I'd use alone. I brought a good wool blanket in September, an extra one from the cedar chest, and she'd looked at it and looked at me, and then taken it without comment and put it on the boy's cot. That was the first time she'd taken something without arguing about it first. I noted that. I fixed the chimney cap on one visit, which had been letting rain in. I found that out when I was inside during a light shower and saw the damp mark on the ceiling boards above the stove. I didn't say anything about it then. I came back the following week with the cap material and went up on the roof and fixed it. Eli stood in the yard and watched me the whole time from directly below, tilting his head when I tilted on the roof, perfectly mirroring my angle as if his body were reading mine. When I came down, he inspected the chimney from below with serious attention and then said, "It doesn't drip now." "That's the idea," I said. He nodded satisfied, filed away. It became, quietly and without announcement, a partnership of sorts. Clara never asked me for things, but she didn't refuse help anymore either, and there's a difference between those two that matters. When I came on a Sunday and there was work she'd been putting off, she'd mention it flat, matter of fact, the way she said everything, and I'd do it. And she'd make coffee and we'd sit after and talk about whatever the week had brought. It was a good arrangement. It felt like something a person could build on. Then I turned an ankle badly one morning, not as dramatic as the snakebite, just a step off a rock wrong, a pop, and a few days where I couldn't put full weight on it. I was at the cabin on a Tuesday evening, doing what I could from a sitting position, and I heard horses outside and went to the window. Amos and Eli rode up on the old gray horse they shared, Amos in the saddle, and Eli behind him with his arms around his brother's waist. I opened the door. "Mama said you hadn't come Sunday," Amos said. "She said to check on you." He kept his face straight when he said it, professional and errand-like, but Eli was already looking past me into the cabin with open curiosity. "I turned my ankle," I said. "Come in." They came in. Eli walked the cabin slowly, looking at everything with the systematic attention of a boy who is cataloging a place so he can think about it later. He stopped at the window where the gray-blue rock sat and touched it with one finger. I watched him touch it. "You kept it," he said. "I did." He looked at me with his serious large eyes, and then he nodded once, satisfied, and moved on to inspect the rest. Amos told me Clara had sent food. He produced a cloth-wrapped parcel from inside his coat, bread and a tin of something warm wrapped in more cloth. He put it on the table and then stood there with his hands at his sides. "She said if you needed anything else we should come back," he said. "Tell her I said thank you." "You could tell her yourself. She'd want to know you're all right." I looked at him. He looked back and there was something in his face, not a 10-year-old's look, something older, something that had been waiting a while, watching things with that patience his mother had, watching and filing it away. "I'll ride out Thursday," I said, "when it's easier on the ankle." He nodded. That was enough. They rode back through the cottonwoods and I stood in the doorway and watched them go, and the evening was amber and still, and the cabin behind me had 2 cups on the table where I'd put out cups for the boys without thinking about it. I went Thursday. Clara met me at the gate. She'd seen me coming across the grass. She looked at my gait as I came up, clocking the ankle, the slight favor to the left. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable, getting better." She opened the gate. We stood in the small yard and she looked at me for a moment without saying anything, and I looked at her, and there was the particular quality of late summer afternoon around us, grasshoppers in the dry grass and a smell of dust and the last of the garden. The goats were visible past the shack, moving slow along the fence line the way goats do. "I miss the Sundays," she said. Plain and honest. That was Clara. She said the true thing in plain words and let it be what it was. "I did too," I said, "more than I expected to." She looked at the fence post at the corner of the yard. Then she looked back at me. "My boys have taken to you," she said. "I've taken to them." "I know," she paused. Eli doesn't do that with many people. The rock he picks those up for, she stopped herself. Her jaw went tight for just a second, something being held in. He gave one to Robert, to his father, before. I held that for a moment. Clara, I said. I'm not asking you for anything, she said, quick and firm. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a woman who goes after things she hasn't been offered, and I'm not going to pretend I don't have two boys who need to be considered. I know you're not. I'm just telling you where things are. I know where things are, I said. I've known for a while. I'm slow at saying things, but I'm not slow at knowing them. She looked at me. I want to come every Sunday, I said. I want to help with the things that need helping. I want to sit at that table and drink your coffee and hear what Eli took apart this week. And I'd like it to be building towards something, if that's what you want too. She was quiet for a long moment. The grasshoppers sawed away in the dry grass. Somewhere in the cottonwoods, a bird called once and went still. It's what I want, she said. And then, because she was Clara, but you should know I'm not easy. I have opinions about things and I say them. I've been running this place on my own for 2 years and I'm not looking to hand that off to someone else. I'll share it with someone. I won't hand it off. I wouldn't want you to. And my boys come first, not first alongside first. As they should, I wouldn't have it different. She looked at me a moment more. Something shifted in her face, not soft exactly, but open. Like a door she'd kept careful hold of letting go on its own hinges. She put her hand on my arm. The good arm, the left one, and her grip was firm and warm, and she held it there for just a moment before she let go. Come inside, she said. The boys will want to see you. September passed and October came in cold. I was out to the shack every Sunday without fail and some Thursdays too, and we'd settled into something that had a shape to it, not named yet, not formal, but real in the way that things are real before they're named. The boys knew it. Children always know before it's said. Amos would be ready at the window when I came across the grass on Sundays. He'd have some piece of information or question saved up for me from the week, something he'd held back for when I arrived, the way you hold back the best part of a story. Eli had taken to sitting on my boots when I was at the table, just sitting there on my feet with no comment. Like that was where he sat. Clara had stopped saying anything about it after the second time. I patched fence with Amos on the west side of the shack, the line that kept the goats from the garden. He worked beside me without show, handing things before I asked for them, holding the post while I drove it, doing it all the way you do when you've learned by watching that this is how work goes. We'd done 2 posts and were starting on the 3rd when he said, without preamble, that the corner post was deeper than I'd gone and I should check it before I assumed the angle was right. I checked it. He was correct. The corner post was set different than the others, and my measurement would have been off. I looked at him, he looked at the post. How'd you know that? I said. I dug it, he said, 2 years ago. It kept healing over, so I went deeper on that one. 10 years old. He dug a post hole alone, deep, to hold a corner that kept failing, and he'd remembered the depth 2 years later and said nothing about it until it was relevant. I went back to work. When we were done, he looked at the fence line, checking it with his eye, sighting down at the way an experienced man checks a line. That'll hold, he said. It will, I said. He looked at it a moment more. Then, my father couldn't do fences. Said plainly, not a complaint, not a boast for me, just the fact. What was he good at? I asked. Amos thought. He could read. He read to us every night when he was home. He had a lot of books. Pause. Mama has them. I didn't say anything. We gathered our tools. He would have liked you, Amos said, still looking at the fence. Then he picked up his end of the tools and carried them back, and that was the end of it. One Thursday evening in late October, I stayed past dark. The weather had turned sharp, and Clara said it was foolish to ride back in the cold and dark, and she made up a pallet near the stove and I slept there. And in the morning she made coffee and the boys were up early, and we had breakfast together in the small shack with the frost on the window and the fire going. And for a length of time that I didn't count and didn't want to count, I was just in a morning with people I cared about, warm and fed and belonging to that room. When I went to saddle my horse, Amos followed me out to the small corral. "You're going to ask my mother to marry you," he said. I buckled the cinch and looked at him over the horse's back. "I'm thinking on it," I said. He nodded, looking at the horse. "You can," he said. "I think you should." I held the reins and looked at him. 10 years old, nearly 11. Standing with his hands at his sides, the morning cold pink in his cheeks, looking at the horse because it was easier than looking at me when he was saying something like this. "Thank you," I said. "That means something to me." He shrugged one shoulder. The shrug of a boy who has said the real thing and needs somewhere to put the feeling that comes after. "Eli would like it too," he said. "He wouldn't say so, he'd just start bringing you more rocks." I asked her on a Sunday in November. Not with ceremony. We were walking the edge of the garden after the boys were in bed, the way we sometimes did in the evenings, the last light gone and the stars filling in from the east. It was cold but not bitter, the kind of cold that makes you want to be close to someone. I stopped and she stopped, and I said what I meant to say. I told her that I'd been alone a long time, and I'd gotten used to it the way a man gets used to a bad back. He adjusts his life around it, and forgets what it was like before. I told her that the boys had walked me out of the grass when I was going down, and I'd come to in her shack, and it had been the first time in years I'd been somewhere that felt like more than where I slept. I told her I was not a smooth man or a rich one, and I had debts on the land and years of hard work ahead, and I didn't know what I had to offer that was worth much except that I would be straight with her always. I would work hard and be honest, and I would be there for her and for the boys, the way a man should be there, without reservation and without quit. She stood in the cold dark and looked at me while I said it. She didn't look away, and she didn't try to stop me or fill the silence when I ran out of words. Then she said, "Yes." Just that, like it wasn't complicated and didn't need to be. I took her hands. Her fingers were cold. I held them between mine and looked at her in the dark, the stars coming on behind her, the grass rustling somewhere out beyond the garden wall. "I used to think I was the kind of man nobody chooses," I said. I hadn't meant to say it. It came out on its own. She squeezed my hands, not to comfort me, to correct me. "I chose you," she said. "We chose you." She meant the boys too. I knew she meant the boys. Stop carrying that. I held her hands in the cold and looked at her, and I stopped carrying it. Just like that, with her standing in front of me saying the plain truth the way she always said things. I let go of what I'd been carrying for longer than I could rightly measure. The solitude, the permanent alone of it, the settled-in belief that a man like me, a man who'd been passing through and stayed too late and let the country swallow him, that was just what he was. 8 years of it, maybe longer, a weight I'd stopped feeling because it had been there so long. She said stop carrying that, and I believed her, because she was Clara and she didn't say things she didn't mean. The wedding was small. January at the settlement with the preacher who came through twice a year. Clara wore her good dress. Amos stood straight the whole ceremony with the gravity of a boy who understands that a thing matters. Eli, halfway through, climbed onto the bench beside me without explanation and sat pressed against my side for the rest of it, watching the preacher with those large, serious eyes. I kept my hand on his shoulder the whole way through. We moved her and the boys into the cabin that spring. The shack was too small for 4 people through a winter. The cabin was tight but possible, and by summer we'd added a room onto the east side. Amos's project as much as mine, him figuring the measurements and cutting more boards than I'd have thought he could and working beside me on Saturdays with the focus of a grown man. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just working. That was the thing about Amos. He worked the way his mother did, quiet and thorough and without drama, because the work needed doing and he was there and able. Clara worked her garden and helped with the cattle and argued with me about the eastern fence line, which she said I was running wrong, and which I admitted after a summer of evidence that she was right about. The issue was the way the creek shifted in spring flood. She'd been watching it longer than I had from that angle, from the shack side, and she'd seen the pattern of where it wanted to go in the high water. I'd been fighting the fence against the water's natural line for 3 years and losing fence every spring, and she'd seen within 2 weeks of living on that side of the creek exactly why. I moved the fence. It held through the following spring without a break. She didn't say she'd told me so. She just smiled at the fence and got back to work. We fell into the rhythm of a place with 4 people in it, which is different from the rhythm of one. There were mornings I was up before anyone, and I'd stand in the kitchen with my coffee and listen to them sleeping, the different sounds of it, Clara's quiet breath, Amos who didn't make a sound, Eli who shifted often and sometimes muttered things. Those mornings were particular. I'd stand there in the dark and hold the coffee and be very still in the middle of it. The first winter was hard in the practical ways, tight quarters, a cold snap in February that kept us all inside for a week, the cattle needing daily checking and the well freezing twice. But none of that was what I remembered of it. What I remembered was different things. Amos at the table on a February evening, working figures by lamplight with his tongue between his teeth, doing the sums for the spring planting because Clara had asked him and he'd said he could manage it, and then sat there and managed it, careful and slow, erasing nothing, getting it right. Clara mending by the fire in the evenings, that same ease she had with her hands, and sometimes reading aloud from one of Robert's books. She'd read to the boys every night, had kept that up, was going to keep it up, and she read the way someone reads who loves to read and doesn't do it for show, just lets the words go where they go. Eli curled against my left side on those evenings, the way he'd settled there on the wedding bench and never quite unsettled. He fit under my arm the way something fits that belongs there. I'd been alone so long that the fullness of it was strange sometimes. I'd wake in the night and hear all of them in the cabin and feel an alarm before I remembered, a reflex left over from years of waking to silence. Then I'd remember and the alarm would go out, and I'd lie still and listen to the cabin breathing and fall back asleep. Clara noticed once. She came awake when I did and she watched me in the dark without saying anything, and then when I'd settled she put her hand flat against my chest, just resting there warm through my shirt. Not asking, not talking, just saying, I know, I'm here, it's all right. That one gesture in the middle of a February night when I was still getting used to being somewhere was worth more than I knew how to say. So I didn't say it. I just put my hand over hers, and after a while we both slept. On a September evening, our first September, the year full and round, I was sitting outside the cabin after supper while the boys played in the last light, Amos running Eli in wide circles that I could hear more than see. Clara came out and stood beside me and didn't sit, just stood there for a moment looking at the land, her land, my land, our land now. Then she did something she rarely did. She put her arm around my shoulder from behind, her chin coming down to rest there, light, her warmth against my back. The way she held me was easy and sure, the way she did most things. She wasn't making a moment of it, she was just there. She didn't say anything, she just stood like that. I looked out at the range running west, going purple in the last light. 8 years of it mine, now more than mine, now shared with a woman who'd looked at me in a store lot in the summer and said it wouldn't be a complication. A woman who'd spent 3 nights keeping a fever from killing a stranger and hadn't made anything of it except, that's what you do. A woman who had her own opinions and her own way, and who had nevertheless said yes in the cold November dark and meant it, and who was standing here now with her arm around me and her chin on my shoulder, saying nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. She said, Amos is going to have to stop chasing his brother. He'll run him into something. He'll be fine. He's going to fall. Let him fall a little. She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, a small sound, warm and private just for here. Eli fell. Amos helped him up, checking the scrape on his knee with the same professional seriousness he brought to everything. They came in as the stars came out, tracking mud, arguing already about something I couldn't follow. Clara went in to deal with them. I stayed outside a moment longer in the dark, in the September cold coming on, looking at the land that was mine and ours, and that had nearly killed me the year before, and at the shack visible through the cottonwoods where a woman and 2 boys had pulled me in out of the grass and given me back to myself. The Eli rock was still on the windowsill in the cabin. I'd moved it when we moved in, put it in the same place, the sill, in the south window where the morning light found it first. Eli had seen it there his first week in the cabin and not said anything. Just that one small nod, the same nod he'd given when he found it at the first cabin. Some things don't need saying. The rock was there, I was there, that was the whole of it.